Welcome into this episode of the Oil and Gas Young Professionals Podcast, and I'm your host, James Cordy. Today we're going to speak to Mark LaCour of Modal Point, the oil and gas sales experts. On the show today, Mark speaks candidly about his background, getting into the industry, what it's like to start a business in the oil and gas industry, and finally, Mark offers some young professional-specific career advice. Let's get into the show this week. All right, today the show, we're going to welcome in my friend, the oil and gas sales expert, and also the voice of the oil and gas community online, Mark LaCour.
Hey, James, how you doing, brother?
Great to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Okay, so, a lot of people know you from your work and your show and everything like that, and they know Modal Point. They know that you're the oil and gas sales expert, but, we haven't really gotten your full story and background, so could you kind of just take us through your history and how you got into oil and gas?
Yeah, it's actually funny. It's gotten to the point now that when we go places publicly, people recognize me. My wife keeps telling me, don't let it go to your head. You're not a movie star. But yeah, my story's a little bit different than a lot of people in this industry. So about 23 years ago, I had met who is the woman who is my wife now. At that point, she was my girlfriend. And I wanted to quit traveling, right? I wanted to stay home more. And I happened to know some senior people at the phone company in the East, which was called Bell South, which no longer exists. And so I went to them and said, look, I need a job where I don't travel as much. And they go, Mark, we have the perfect position for you, but we just need to warn you, it's had declining revenue for over 30 years. And I go, I want it. The truth is, I had no idea what it really was. I just wanted the job. So they gave it to me, and it was their strategic sales manager for their oil and gas book of business. So Bell South, the phone company in the East, basically gave me all of their oil and gas accounts. Now, I knew absolutely nothing about oil and gas, but I wanted to make money and I wanted to do a good job. So what I did at first is try to set meetings with some of my clients they gave me just so I could talk to them and understand what's going on. And the first company that agreed to meet me was Chevron out in San Ramon, California. And the person that agreed to meet with me was a lowly procurement guy. And he was the only one that would meet with me. So I jumped on a plane, flew out to California, put my suit on, went out to their corporate headquarters in Pleasanton, and went through security, get to the guy's office, and I walk in, knock on the door, walk in, and he's at his desk, and he looks at me. He doesn't stand up. He doesn't offer me his hand. Doesn't even say hello. And he goes, we have been paying tariff rates for over 50 years. Why the hell should I be talking to you right now? And that was my introduction into oil and gas.
Oh, it's baptism by fire.
Yeah. And so if you fast forward to right now, that guy is now in charge of all the supply chain for Africa for Chevron. I'm the godfather of his children, and he's one of my best friends. So needless to say, in my learning my accounts, I worked really hard to understand the businesses, not how can Mark make money or how can Bell South make money, but what is the business of Chevron? What is the business of Halliburton, of Baker, of BJ Services, of Shell, of Exxon? How are they different? What I did is I made sure I did high quality work, and they eventually took notice. I'll give you a good example. Schlumberger would not talk to me to save my life. I could not get a meeting with them for anything. So by this point, I had grown the oil and gas book of business for Bell substantially, and I had a pretty good support staff. So what I did internally within Bell is every year, as I did better, they wanted to jack my quota. And what I would do is I would negotiate my quota, but I'd also want headcount, so dedicated customer service people, dedicated sales engineer, get dedicated service manager. So by this point, I had dedicated customer service personnel, and so I put them on a project. And this was back in the 90s. So back then, companies were just transitioning to Ethernet networks for their employees from dial-up. And so one of the problems that a lot of companies had, especially for executives, they'd have a separate dial-up phone line for their modems in their computer. And when they would switch to Ethernet, because the people that were installing Ethernet were actually the IT guys inside of the company, and the people that were responsible for the phone services was a separate group, they didn't talk to each other. So often what would happen is a company would switch to an internal Ethernet network, but nobody would tell the people that took care of telecommunications, so they would never cut off those phone modems, and they just keep billing month after month. So I put my customer service reps on that for Schlumberger, and come to find out, yep, Schlumberger was in that exact situation. So I literally went to Schlumberger with a check for $49,000 worth of refunds, and they talked to me. And they said, we have never had a vendor that has brought us a check back. So see how I understood the business, and I made sure I did really good work for them As I grew, my reach within the oil and gas business.
Yeah, no, I mean that makes absolute sense. You understand the business and you figure out what things that are kind of having, causing issues for them that maybe they don't even know about, and you bring it to their attention to build up some equity there.
Yeah, and so what happens? They started seeing me not as a vendor, but as an asset, which then opened up the whole world to me. So I've been offshore multiple times. I don't want to mention the name of the company now because probably people could still get in trouble. But I would go, hey, I want to go offshore, company XYZ, and they'd go, oh, meet me at the heliport in Lafayette, and they would just put me on a helicopter. And I'd go offshore. I've been in mud plants, I've been in refineries, I've been in pipeline companies, I've been network operations centers, I've been in disaster recovery centers, through tubing, coil tubing. I've not only have I seen it, I've touched it, I've done it, I know how it works. Now this is over a span of 20 years, and so we built that book of business, and it was awesome. And speaking of learning the industry, I actually learned the industry so well that when somebody like, say, Baker Hughes corporate would issue an RFP for like this entire North America, I would go to the Baker Hughes offices who actually make money for the company, as opposed to corporate procurement who costs money for company. I go, hey, corporate's wanting to make us bid against MCI or Sprint or whatever. And the guy that I knew there thought of me so highly, he'd pick up the phone and chew procurement out. And so I would be able to carve out my pieces of RFP at the price points I wanted. Now, this wasn't me leveraging Baker Hughes. This was Baker Hughes seeing the advantage of working with me, having that one contact, knowing that you cannot run an oil field service company without communications. And so this was a great fun. It's a great learning experience for me. I built a great team. We turned that book of business that had declining revenue around. We actually grew that book of business. And then we get to Katrina. So for the 2 years before Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, I had been lobbying my management to let me move to Houston. And if people don't remember the old Bell South SBC phone territories. So basically, Bell South ended at Louisiana and SBC's picked up in Texas. So it was outside of Bell South's territory.
And where were you living?
And at that time, I was living in New Orleans, which is another long story.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I lobbied my management to move me from Atlanta to New Orleans so I'd be closer to my clients. And it was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. I was still jumping on a plane every week, flying to Houston. It didn't matter if the flight was shorter. But New Orleans is a wonderful city to explore, to spend a weekend in. But the truth is, it's small and it's cramped. It's not a great place to live. But anyway, you live and you learn. So I had lobbied my management for 2 years to try to let me move to Houston, and they didn't want to. Fact is, my direct manager believed in seeing butts in seats. He didn't believe in telecommuting. He wanted to see you every day. Now, luckily for me, he got a new manager, right? So the VP of sales for that region, and she was much more open-minded. So eventually, with a bunch of pleading and promises, they allowed me to move to Houston as a trial. So it wasn't even perfect. In fact, they couldn't even pay me. The Bell South payroll system had never paid anybody in Texas before ever. So they had to go get somebody to write some code so they could even pay me. And so put my house on the market, sold it almost immediately, moved to Houston. My wife and I, my 3-month-old at the time, and 2 weeks later, Hurricane Katrina came through.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I was, living in New Orleans at the same time as well. And that changed not just life for everyone that was living in New Orleans, but also just for the entire region.
Yeah. And so what a lot of people may not know, you can't run a refinery or a pipeline without telecommunications, without connectivity. And everybody connected back to Houston. So all the refineries in Louisiana were down. All the pipelines were down. And we're not talking about companies being able to make money. You remember this, James. You couldn't buy gasoline. Right?
You couldn't buy anything.
You couldn't buy anything. The infrastructure, critical infrastructure was destroyed. And, this could bring a tear to my eye. I have a movie clip of New Orleans flooded. And the Bell South CO on Pointers is lit. And we're bringing in supplies on the 3rd floor. Because 100 years ago, when Bell South engineers designed that building, they knew that one day if New Orleans flooded, they knew the water level, where it would be, where they would have to build a ramp so they could offload supplies. So the Bell South CO stayed up, which means our telecommunications stayed up. No, everybody else was dead. And so we were the only telecommunication provider out there. Unfortunately, because of the way things were basically configured, everybody else's network failed to ours. So when the Sprint network went down, it dumped the Sprint traffic on Bell South's network. When the MCI network went down, it dumped the MCI's traffic on Bell's network. When the AT&T network went down, it dumped. And so the Bell network was so overloaded that nothing could get through because of time. If you remember, text would get through. because texts don't have a latency component to it. So eventually that text would work its way through and you would actually get them. So when Katrina happened, I was the only Bell South person that anybody could reach. Not that my guys were dead. There was just no way you couldn't call them. There's no way to communicate with them. So I put together an emergency hit team. I put together some engineers in Atlanta and some project managers in Miami, and we started hitting this thing head on. And so I did stuff that was crazy. Stuff that was broke company policy, broke laws. There's the Exxon refinery right there in Chalmette. We had to get communications up. So we had connectivity at the Bell South CO, but how do you get it right down the street to Chalmette? You can't go string any fiber or wire. So there's this old technology called microwave shots. So I looked up on in our internal tools, and I found some microwave engineers with Bell that were retired, and I pulled them out of retirement. Now, I had no authority to do that at all. But, they were good for the cause. They got out, and they went and rigged a microwave shot from the Bell CO down into the Chalmette refinery and got Exxon talking. Well, guess what? That refinery got lit. It could start producing fuel, which then helped the problem that everybody was dealing with. And we did that one by one, piece by piece. And it took about a year to get all that stuff fixed and done. And even, James, this is funny. Even just a few months ago, I had somebody from the Exxon refinery in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, call me about a circuit that my name was actually on the tag for. It's still, touching. But we did really earth-changing work, right? We did the right stuff. One of the things I'm so proud of, and this is why I love this industry so much, is all of these deals I did while the chips were down, while people were worried about their safety. My own tech crews had to be guarded by the National Guard. All of this work was done on handshakes. Some of it wasn't even a handshake, it was a phone call. And the thing I'm most proud of, when all this stuff was done, every one of those bills were paid, no questions asked. How you don't see it anywhere else.
That's a really amazing story. This is you and your team and all these people just working together to, take the rules and just throw them aside and say, look, people actually need help. We've got to get this thing up and running again.
Yeah. And it's, when it was all over with and everything was back to somewhat normal, I got called into corporate office in Atlanta, and the COO. So my boss's boss was sitting there. And you remember old dot matrix print sheets, the green and whites with the dots on the sides, the holes on the sides?
Unfortunately, I don't, Mark.
Yeah, dating myself. Well, some of the audience out there probably remembers that. Anyway, he had this dot matrix printout that went to the floor, and he had a red pen. So his admin walks me in there. I sit down, and he's taking this, and he's going through this one by one with the red pen. He's going, broke FCC law, broke FCC law, broke company policy, broke state policy, broke company policy, broke FCC law. And so at first, I'm watching him do this like, oh, I'm going to get in trouble. And then he kept doing it. And he kept doing it. It's like, damn, I'm going to lose my job. And then he kept doing it and kept doing it. It's like, I'm going to go to jail. All right. I was like really scared. And when he got to the bottom of the list, he put it down. He took his reading glasses off and he looked at me. He goes, Mark, let me tell you something. I'm damn proud to have you on our team. He goes, in this situation, you did the right thing. Thank you. He goes, in any other situation, you'd be out of here so quick. He goes, this was the right thing to do because this was a national disaster. So, love the company, love the work I did. A lot of the relationships that I use now at Modal Point started back then. And it was a horrible time. A lot of people lost everything they had. Unfortunately, some people lost their lives. But at the same time, I saw some of the best things in people come out. I saw competitors work together, right, because it needed to be done. And it was just, it makes you believe in humanity again. But that's how I got my start. And it was a great way to get your start because I took the phone company's oil and gas book of business. I wasn't siloed into one segment. So I didn't just know service. I didn't just know upstream. I didn't just know downstream. I didn't just know midstream. I got to see it all, which now helps me immensely, to have a kind of a universal look at this industry.
Well, that's one thing you definitely preach to people, especially in the down market. You just understand how the pie, it's bigger than just your one segment and how it all fits together. If you know how it works, you can find the opportunities there.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've never noticed. This is my fourth downturn I've been through, but I've never noticed how upstream centric the Houston culture is. So the funny thing is, you go talk to anybody in the city and you read the newspapers, and they talk about how it's all doom and gloom. But if you pick your head up and look around, the population of Houston's going up. That's why traffic's so bad. There's not enough Class A office space. They're tearing down perfectly fine Class B office space to stand up Class A office space. The reason, of course, for all of that is you have two things going on. You have companies like Anadarko closing remote offices because of the low crude price, but they're bringing their people back here, which means those jobs are back here now. The other thing that's going on is the boom in downstream, which is right here in our backyard. So you have all these downstream construction companies, big EPCs, and then eventually the companies that are going to run, these petrochemical plants and ethylene crackers, whatever, they're bringing their people here. So Houston's actually doing really well in this low crude price environment. But if you listen to the news, you would never think so.
Yeah, and I mean, the one thing that was really striking, if you just drive around or you're going back to Louisiana when I go visit home and you're going just driving around the city, really, when you take a line and you draw it through downtown, everything to the west is kind of upstream centric, and that's very white collar. But you and James Hahn on your shows always say go downstream, and people, where is that? Maybe that's East Houston. That's anywhere east of downtown. The Ship Channel, and you just go over there, and you literally see construction and capex, and just everything's booming over there.
Yeah, yeah. So if your listeners work in this industry and they're worried about stuff, my advice is back up, take a deep breath. It's okay. This happens. It's gonna happen again, unfortunately. But learn other parts of the industry so that you're not chained to one of the segments. If things go downhill for that segment, you can jump to the other segment where things are just fine.
Okay, so how did you, Modal Point, you eventually started your own company. Why did you do that? And how did you go from, this Katrina story where you just did a tremendous amount of work to help people out to, now you're the oil and gas sales expert?
Yeah, so Bell South got bought by AT&T. At that point, it was no longer a good fit for me. That was right around the time that telecommunications were being commoditized. So I went to work for a startup. I think everybody has at least one startup in their belt. That was great because I had to learn humility. When I had the Bell South name behind me, I could talk to anybody I want. In fact, one of the things I used to do, I can't believe I'm about to admit this on your show, but if I wanted to know a company and it was in Bell South territory, let's say it was Halliburton, I would put my Bell South hard hat in. I just walk in. Nobody would stop the guy. I mean, I never got stopped. I just walk in and start talking to people. When I went to work for a startup, you couldn't do that. In fact, so you had to learn how to develop business when people had never heard of your company. And let me tell you, that is way harder than when you have name recognition. That was a good learning experience for me. Unfortunately, that startup eventually didn't work out. And then went to work for a big research company, Forrester Research, which is where a lot of my research methodology came from. Great company. I had their oil and gas key accounts, so their most important accounts to them. Learned a lot. I mean, a lot from them. That was another position where our clients didn't see me as a vendor, but as a trusted advisor. So, somebody like Exxon was getting ready to renew their SAP contracts. Well, I had people that worked at SAP, right, on my team. I would bring in and help them understand, here's what SAP will back down. Here's the price points they'll hit. They won't go lower than this. Here's stuff they will give you that they won't tell you they'll give you. And so, you save ExxonMobil $10 million on SAP contract renegotiation. All of a sudden, they like you. So that was a great gig. I still have friends that work over there. Unfortunately, they decided to cap my commission. And it just quite honestly pissed me off. If you're a salesperson and somebody caps your commission, they're basically saying, we want you to work this hard, but no harder. And that just doesn't fit my personality. So Modal Point actually was my wife's idea. She came up with it. She goes, we're at a point now where we can take a little bit of a chance. You have all these hundreds of companies coming to you, want you to help them sell to oil and gas. Why don't you start a consulting company to do that? And James, between you and I and our listeners here, I told my wife I didn't think it was a good idea. The truth was I was scared. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to pay my rent, that I'd end up living on the street, blah, blah, blah. But eventually I talked to enough people and I got some letter of intent that I made that jump. So we started Modal Point, I think December 26th. And January 13th, we had our first client, and I haven't stopped since then.
Yeah, I mean, that's really amazing. You were able to, with some courage of your wife, you were able to just go out and, become an entrepreneur and start your own business. And now you're really just have established yourself as just a key part of the oil and gas community, both on and offline here.
Yeah, so let me back you up. Between the starting of Modal Point and what we're doing now, there's been a lot of failure. I have done everything wrong at least once, sometimes 2 or 3 times. I tell people this all the time, especially entrepreneurs. It's not hard to work for yourself and make money. It's really not. What's hard is to make good money without working your butt off. That's the difference. And it took me a couple of years to figure out how to get there, how to do high quality, impactful work that drives real value for my clients. So in my case, it's very measurable. I affect your top line quickly. So if you're a sales organization and you engage with me, you see your sales revenue grow rather quickly. If it doesn't, that means I failed. Now, so far, knock on wood, I've never failed. So that means that my clients see me as invaluable. I mean, it's not that I'm a trusted advisor anymore. It's like I'm part of the family. And then how good do you think that feels from my end, where at the end of the day, some CEO claps me on the back, looks me straight in the eye, and sincerely says, "Mark, we could have never done this without you. Thank you."
Yeah.
That feeling is worth what they're paying me for. In fact, that feeling is probably worth more than what they're paying me.
Yeah, and also, in the early stages, you've told me offline personally, maybe you started out doing one thing, and then it was important that you failed, but it's, the failure is important because you learned from those failures, and you asked your customers what they would pay you for, and now you're doing exactly that, and you have more business than you can even deal with.
Yeah, let's break that down, because anybody out there that's thinking about starting a business or has one needs to understand this. So when I first started Modal Point, I had a good idea, and I went out and I sold it. I sold it not because it was a good idea, but because I was a good salesperson. I didn't know that. Because I sold it, I thought I was onto something. So I spent the next year trying to replicate that, and I couldn't. And it was a grind, right? We had just enough revenue coming in to keep everybody employed, but we couldn't really grow. And I kept trying to repeat the sell, and I couldn't do it, and I couldn't do it, and I couldn't do it. And eventually, after about 18 months, I had to come to realization that it wasn't working. I didn't know why it wasn't working. I didn't know what was going to work, but I know it wasn't working. So I literally shut my company down. I laid everybody off, gave them all a little package, and then just stopped. And I went back to all the people that I engaged with that did not engage with me. And I went with my researcher hat on, not my sales hat on. And I wanted to understand why they didn't engage with me. And what I found out was that companies will outsource everything, HR, legal, IT, but they don't want to outsource their sales teams because they want to own that customer relationship. Unfortunately, when I started Modal Point, that was my idea, and I managed to find a company that was willing to outsource their sales team, so I sold it. And so then I went back once again with my researcher hat on, and I asked people, "What would you be willing to pay me for?" And after doing enough research, come to find out what they would be willing to pay me for is to help them figure out where their product or service fits in the oil and gas industry, who would buy it, and what is the value that actually brings. So we then started Modal Point again for the second time on a different track, doing actually just market research for oil and gas. And that's been a totally different journey for me. Instead of feeling like I'm pushing a boulder uphill, quite frankly, I'm running down the hill and boulders are chasing me. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you have a small business, if it's not working, if it's a struggle, stop. Take your ego out of it. Back up, look at the bigger picture, figure out what's going on. In fact, a great way to do this is ping some of your peers, right? Not friends, not people that are close to you because they won't tell you the truth because they like you, but people that are similar to you in their career path, and let them see what's going on. And you'd be surprised the stuff that's obvious that they'll point out to you that you won't see yourself because you're too close to it.
Exactly. I mean, what you really could have done, you could have, like you said, swallow your ego, and you could have gone back and saw that this wasn't working as well as you thought, got some feedback, made some tweaks to the product, and kept going back and improving it incrementally. And, you could have, instead of taking 18 months, you could have done that after your first customer or after 6 months, or just, reduce the cycle time there to get feedback and improve your service for your consulting company. And I mean, you did that eventually.
Yeah, eventually. But because my ego was involved, because I knew I was right about this, I didn't see that I was too close to the problem. So now it's funny, after going through that experience, I have a bit of the opposite problem. Is now every time there's something not quite going right, I'm wondering, is this a failure? Should I stop it? So I'm a little bit too much the other way now, but it's a balance in there somewhere in the middle is a good place to be. But I'm telling you, if you're in that situation, if you're an entrepreneur in that situation, gather as much of the facts as you can and get some of your peers to look at it, and they will quickly show you where the constraints are or where the holes are.
Yeah, Mark, that's an awesome story. So moving on from that, now we've kind of established your background and how you've established yourself as the oil and gas sales expert, and you're a successful entrepreneur in the oil and gas industry. So most of people know you, and I know you directly from your work on the Oil and Gas Career Show. But first, the Oil and Gas This Week podcast. Can you take us back to the beginning, maybe just when James Hunt approached you and had this idea, and how it grew into the wild success story that it is today?
Yeah, it's he makes fun of me this. So this is the real backstory. When I had my own company, I wasted a lot of money with digital marketing agencies. I mean, a lot of money. A lot of them are really good at digital marketing, but they just don't get it. So I'd have monthly meetings with these companies, and they'd show me how many new page views they got me, how many likes they got me. And I would go, my phone is not ringing. And they would go, but yeah, look at all the traffic. Look at this. What they didn't really get is that marketing has to drive sales results. Marketing for marketing, it's um, um, data itself is not valuable to an organization that needs to sell a product or service. So after wasting a bunch of money, not getting any results, I was basically disgusted with that whole group of people. I didn't really see them as being useful. James Hahn found me, and I didn't really even want to engage with him because of the way I was thinking about this. And he eventually talked me into it. And I actually gave him access to be able to look behind the scenes in my WordPress site, which is all I had at that point. And he came back to me, he goes, dude, I can't believe it. And I go, I didn't think I was doing too many things good. He goes, no. He goes, I've had a lot of clients. I've never seen anybody do everything wrong. Somehow you're doing everything wrong. He goes, I don't know how you have any business. So that instantly said, you know what, maybe I should talk to this guy more. So James Hahn ended up initially becoming a vendor of mine and taught me, or actually I paid him to teach me how to use social media properly to drive sales results, because there's a million ways to do it wrong. There's only a few ways to do it right. And so once he taught me that, I now have that knowledge in my head. And so my people, my interns and my virtual assistants, they now do most of the work for that, but I can check up on them. If they make a mistake, I can correct them. I have a bit of a thing about my business that I don't like other people to know parts of my business I don't know. Doesn't mean I do it, but I like to at least know how it's done. And so that's worked really well for me. I mean, it's ridiculous. You keep talking about oil and gas sales experts. Really, Google believes that about me. If you Google oil and gas sales experts, you'll see me come up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 organically. And that's just, imagine what that's done for my business. Imagine if anybody in the world types in oil and gas sales experts and they see me first, second, and third. I mean, my phone just rings. So anyway, that's how my relationship with James Hahn started. So we went from being a vendor to becoming maybe not friends yet, but really good acquaintance, really good business acquaintance, where I had a high trust relationship with him. And so then about, I don't know, 13 months ago, 14 months ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, he came to me and goes, man, we need to do a podcast. And I go, I don't have time to do a podcast. It's a waste of time. And I really thought it was a waste of time. So he's on me. And then eventually I just wanted him to shut up. So I said, okay, I'll do the podcast. Still not believing it was worth my time, but just to get him to shut up. And that was the beginning of Oil and Gas This Week, is me wanting him to shut up. So, once again, I'll be the first to admit I was wrong. The podcast has had great success, great growth rate. People love it. They find it very useful. And then surprisingly enough, we have companies wanting to sponsor it. So it's now a revenue stream for us, none of which I thought we'd ever get to. But that's the story of the beginning of Oil and Gas This Week.
Yeah, and I mean, what is it, 59, 60 episodes later, y'all are, number one in the search rankings, and you have a huge community of people and, friends that you've met through the show.
Yeah, and if you're a podcast person, especially if you're a marketer in podcasting, our numbers don't equate our revenue. We should not be making as much money as we do. The reason that we are is that our podcast audience is so loyal. And so our sponsors, we don't take sponsors who are trying to sell anything. We take sponsors who are trying to get exposure. Our sponsors know that when you listen to Oil and Gas This Week, the odds are those earbuds are in your head 45 minutes every week. It's not like a radio show where you can flip through the stations, or banner ads where you can just ignore them. You hear our sponsorship message because you listen to our show. And that's very valuable for companies that are trying to dissertate knowledge out there about what they're doing differently or what they're doing no. So that's why we've had such great success. And then in the success of those podcasts has spawned other podcasts. So, I'm not going to go into it here, but we have other podcasts in the works that we're negotiating sponsorships with. I would not be surprised, James, if 2 years from now that there's 4 or 5 podcasts all built around different subjects, all built around Oil and Gas This Week, which is the original one.
Yeah, I mean, again, to go back on the revenue and the loyalty, you have a little nook of people's lives every week, and you build up that customer loyalty, like you discussed, and customer intimacy. And I mean, there's real value there. It's almost like we get to hang out with you and James once a week. And, we feel like we're a part of your life, and when we interact and, with the first Friday Q&A and everything like that. And I mean, that's really valuable. It's like you said, you're receiving news about not just, ads or banners, but real companies that solve real problems and provide services to people who are directly your audience. So, I mean, there's no better advertising than that, I would say.
And we really, I really think of everybody as a family. You and I met through the podcast. I meet people probably on a monthly basis that I feel like I've met before, and we've never met in real time, right? It's all been virtual. but because we're that level of communication is one step below just business emails. I mean, one step above. It's you develop an intimacy with your audience, and you get to know them. And I actually think, I'm 50 years old. I actually think this is pretty cool. It's like, when I was younger, you would have to do all this in person, which would take a lot of time. I now have pretty deep personal relationships with audience members of ours that are in Africa that I've never met, and I just think it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, y'all are building the online community for the oil and gas industry. And, maybe this is, we're sort of like a family tree. And I mean, maybe I'm not directly, owned by y'all, but this is a part, James Hahn and yourself have helped me make this show. And we hope to just kind of further the oil and gas industry and, maybe help people out and provide some value to them every week, at least here on the shows.
Yeah. So you're part of the tree, right? It's, you came in, you have a desire, you want to help, it's genuine. We help you because it's genuine from our part. And, we help others because it's genuine. And you eventually help others. And you start thinking about that over the next 10 years. I mean, it's just a great thing.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, when I found the show, I just was, like most people do, I was just so eager for that content, and I just consumed it, and I binge watched it, and I reached out to y'all, and I mean, it's accelerated my personal network beyond what I could ever feel like. So again, speaking on the network acceleration and things like that, could you kind of talk about how you suggested I get more involved when I asked you what I should do when I first reached out and said that I liked the show in the form of the API Young Professionals?
Yeah. So I gotta make sure I understand what you're asking me here. Are you asking me why I thought you should join the Young Professionals?
No, well, that's part of the question. Let's walk that back, though. Let's talk about, the group itself, why you started it, what you hope to accomplish, and why you suggested people like myself join.
Yeah. So here's the cool thing. I get to be totally honest about API because I know none of them listen to podcasts. I know they don't even know how to listen to podcasts. So the American Petroleum Institute is one of the largest political groups in the U.S. We represent the rights of the oil and gas industry to Congress, but we also set the standards. So we have a standardization group for almost everything offshore. If you go offshore and you wash your hands, that soap has to meet some API standard. Now, those efforts take money. So there's all these local chapters all over the world. The largest local chapter is the API Houston chapter, which I am on the board of. I'm the director of public relations for the API Houston chapter. So they call me the kid on the board. Remember, I'm 50 years old, and they call me the kid. Does that kind of give you a visual of what this looks like? And so these are some very senior people in the oil and gas industry. I mean, they've forgotten more than I know about it, but they're from a different generation. And I've been a member of API Houston for probably 15 years. And it was a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, it hit me. We were at a luncheon, and I'm looking around. It's like everybody in here is the same people that I had been going to these lunches with for the last 15 years. I see no new people. And then I started looking around and putting people together in buckets in my head as far as age. And it's like, I don't think there's anybody in here below 35. And so you think about that long term for an organization, the end result is not pretty. If you have no new blood coming in and everybody's getting older, at some point it will disappear. So I bring it to attention to my API board and say, I think we need to start a young professionals group. And they didn't agree with me. And it took me 18 months to get approval because it was something new, right? And if you know the oil and gas industry, nobody likes anything new in this industry. To be 18 months of political rallying and calling in my favor cards and everything else to get enough votes on the board, because this had to be voted in, to try it. But it needed to have happened. It needed to have happened, number one, to save API Houston, even though API Houston didn't know they needed to be saved. Number two, the world has changed, right? The way, James, that you and your peers think and do things is radically different than the way I and my peers do things. Is one better than the other? Quite frankly, I used to say no, they were just different. Now I will say no, your way is better. I in one of my conference rooms, I just installed a big plasma instead of a LCD, and one of my interns was with me, and so I'm trying to figure out how to turn the darn thing on. So I grabbed the instruction manual. She grabs her phone and Googles it, and she figures out how to turn it on quicker than I did. And I was like, a revelation, like, whoa, it's better, right? I don't think that way. I know I can, and when I need to, I do. I don't think first thing to grab something and Google it. It's not my generation. So if you think about it from that point, I have an obligation when I see that there's a problem here. If I think the younger generation's way of doing things is better, I have an obligation to try to bring it to oil and gas industry. I don't want that way of thinking, that talent edge, to go somewhere else. That was another reason I started. Now, we could spend a whole show on all the hoops and failures and everything else that's happened trying to stand up this group. But I now have a very solid group of leaders there, which you are the leader, James. The reason I thought you should join is I saw your energy, I saw your passion. I needed that in this group, but I also saw that you had a thirst for knowledge, want to learn about this. So I thought it was a fair trade. So I invite you to join, and you did, and I'm so glad that you joined.
Yeah, and I mean, just to speak on that, now, the API Young Professionals, what we're trying to build, if you're not familiar with it, in addition to what Mark says, is we kind of figured out that there's a real hunger to accelerate, and just grow your career. And normally people, that effort takes the form of joining networking organizations. So what we're trying to do is build an organization, there's different niches and everything like that. But what we want to do is build, one that's catered to actually accelerate your career and build the young professional organization. So we want to hear from people, that listen to this show, and maybe our members out there, or just anyone else that has some feedback. What do you want? And are you curious about knowledge? How do you want to accelerate your career? How do you want to network? Do you need help knowing how to network? Do you need resume help? Do you want to know how to get in? Anything like that, we want to hear from people. And because like we were talking about earlier with Mark and his customers, his clients, the customers are the under 35 demographic in oil and gas for, both this show and young professional groups. So if you're a part of another group, reach out to us as well. We want to build a family here so that we can further the oil and gas industry and get some, creative, innovative ideas to, cause disruptive change for the better in the industry.
Yeah, great stuff. And I'm telling you, people, if you're a young professional in oil and gas, or you're just thinking about getting oil and gas, reach out to James, reach out to the Houston API Young Professionals Group. They have been so helpful with so many people. They'll be happy to share what they know. And if they don't know, they'll tell you and point you in the right direction.
Okay, so touching off of that, Mark, could you give some advice to people on, we hear you on the career show talking about, just career advice as a general topic, but could you give some specific advice to people who are maybe graduating from college or are a part of the under 35 demographic in oil and gas?
That they're entered in industry or will enter the industry soon?
I mean, it just could be anyone, outside or in. I mean, just, you always give career advice to people in general, but could you talk to the younger people out there?
Yeah, so if we're doing something broader based, not just oil and gas focus, I can tell you a couple things. So first thing is, experience is more, and this can sound horrible, experience counts for a lot more than education used to. So if you 6-7 years ago, if I was looking at two recent grads, and I was for an entry level position, one had an MBA, I would pick the MBA, right? It's not like that anymore. People are looking for the degree plus experience. So now, if you're have a bachelor's degree, but you did an internship doing whatever this work is, or you have an MBA who doesn't have an internship, the guy with the internship will get picked up. So if you're looking at your career path down the road, try to get some experience. Try to pick up an internship. I would suggest that you only do paid internships, because in my experience, companies that do interns where they don't pay don't really put energy back in developing that intern. Just remember, if you're trying to get an internship, you need to start a year ahead of time. Don't wait till April to try to get a summer internship. Another thing is be proactive about that. Even companies that aren't active looking for interns. I know several big oil field service companies that don't actively look for interns, but probably hire about 50 a year, because interns will reach out and say, hey, do you have any intern opportunities? They go, no, but tell me what you're looking for, and they'll find a place for them. This industry likes to help young people in the right way. So that's important. Try to get some work experience. The other thing is show some patience. I know that you probably should be VP after 2 years, but people in my generation think that won't happen. So somewhere in the middle ground is where the reality is. You need to have a little bit of patience and know that it's going to take a little bit of time. Other thing is, you need to have a plan for your own career path. So if you go work for a medium to large company, they'll develop a career plan for you, right? And you'll have yearly performance reviews that are tied back to that career plan. But that's the company that you're working for, working with you to figure out how to best use your talent. That may not necessarily be the best career path for you. For instance, I mentor a lot of young people, and in the last couple of years, their career path is, I go work for a large oil and gas company. I learn XYZ. I then start on the side, my own little company. At year 5 at large company XYZ, I make the transition. I'm running my own company. That's the right career path for them, which doesn't match up. Trust me, if you're working for a large oil company and their career path for you, they don't have it year 5 that you go work for your own company. So, it's just the state of the world that we're in. The other thing is always be open into learning. The moment you stop learning is the moment you stop progressing. We actually put time in our calendar to learn something new every month. So, at a high level, it's kind of some advice I would give to people. The other thing is look in places, if you're struggling to find a job, look in places that need your skill sets, but you wouldn't normally look. So, if you have a degree in electrical engineering and you're struggling to get a job in the oil and gas industry, if you're looking at upstream and service, you're not going to get one right now in 2016. So look at downstream. They're hiring like crazy. But, they also need electrical engineers in medical. You may not have ever thought about that, right? Because you don't think of electrical engineering medical. So just, think outside, think where your skill sets both fit, not necessarily what markets you traditionally go work in.
Well, can I ask you one question? If there's people that, have already secured jobs, and again, there's a lot of, more senior people that work at these companies. If I'm showing up on day one, what do you want to see from me? What do you want from your new hires? How can we, because you never get a second chance to make a first impression. How can a young person that's starting at a big company or just any company, impress and give what the older generation wants to see from them?
Yeah, that's a great one. So first thing, you need to show a little bit of respect, whether it's deserved or not, just fake it. Second thing, be open to picking up additional work. So if they want you to do XYZ, ask them, is there something else I do? Is there a special project? My generation loves to see go-getters. We love to see people go the extra mile professionally. So if you do a little bit of that, that will make you rise head and tails above your peers. I mean, I work with a lot of millennials, and I hire them as interns, and I have a mentor, a lot of them. And the ones that stand out to me are the ones that are hungry, that want more, that are willing to put the work in. I see a lot of them that have the talent. And I see a lot of them that want to put just enough work in. And I've gotten to understand that the reason they're like that is their world is not work. And I respect that. I get that, right? So they want to do a good job, but no more than that, so they can spend time on their own personal interests. I totally get that. In fact, I take Thursdays off and teach high school because it's my passion project, right? So I'm kind of in the same boat. But when you're first starting, especially with people, Gen Xers like me, don't show that. Show them that you want to go the extra mile. It's only a short-term thing, but once you set that perception in a new place, once they start thinking of you a certain way, unless you do something really stupid and screw it up, they won't ever change the way they think about you. So you do that for a little while, and then you back off to doing, just what you need to do a good job, but they still think of you as a go-getter.
Yeah, that's really great stuff, Mark. That makes a whole lot of sense. And oil and gas is, resistant to change and a bit old-fashioned. So if you kind of just think about what your parents want you to do when you're going to work, that can go a long way for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the world has changed because of technologies, and the world is actually, in my opinion, much better than it used to be. I have virtual assistants in Malaysia that do work for me. A few years ago, I couldn't have done that. I would have had to jump on a plane. I think that's awesome. And at the same time, my money is going to support a family in another country that can use that money. My generation is not as technology savvy as millennials, and then you talk about the oil and gas industry, which has that big risk aversion. So another thing you can bring in quite simply is your love for technology. I'm not saying go show somebody how to play on Facebook and Candy Crush, right? But if you're a new hire someplace and somebody's trying to set something up, instead of them calling IT, go help them with it. It's probably second nature to you, but to the older guys, it's a bit of a struggle. And when they see that you make a personal effort to help them, that's huge.
Yeah, again, that's an example of just going out of your way to just help people. I mean, the oil and gas industry, you always say, it's about people first. And so, I mean, if you just on a human level, just level with people and just figure out anything that they're doing that maybe you can just help with, that's not even so tough for you.
Yeah, it's this is the industry of people doing business, people. And one of the things that a lot of millennials, I think, have a bit of a struggle with, especially when they step into corporate America, not to small business entrepreneurship, but when they step into corporate America, is they feel intimidated and they lose their social skills. It's not that they don't have social skills. They have them. But when you walk into that floor at ExxonMobil and there's 8,000 people there that you don't know, you get intimidated and all of a sudden you start shutting down. So here's my advice to that: fake it. fake like you know what you're doing, that you're not scared, that you've been there forever, that you know everybody. If you fake it long enough, and I didn't make this up, this is a psychological principle, your brain will start believing it, and then you will start being that. So, I've seen this, unfortunately, quite a few times, where a very bright, promising young person comes into a large company. They have a huge future in front of them, but because they get intimidated because they've never been in that environment, they shut down socially, and then people's perception of them is that they don't work with others, and that's not what it is at all. But that's the perception, because they've been shut down socially because they're scared.
Yeah, it's sort of like psychological muscle memory. Fake it till you make it, and eventually you will. All right, Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're coming up on 45 minutes here. I just want to thank you for coming on and giving me your time, and everyone else out there also giving us your time, because we know that your time is valuable. And I appreciate you giving me, just some, a little bit of your day to just sit down here and learn some things and pick the brain of the oil and gas sales expert, Mark LaCour.
Yeah, you're very welcome, James. I was glad I could be here.
All right. Till next time, guys. Appreciate it, Mark.
See you, brother.
All right. So that was Mark LaCour speaking directly to you, the oil and gas young professional, or anyone who might be interested in the oil and gas young professional. So that was the show. It's coming to your iTunes feed, your podcast feed, every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. Central Standard. That's when the show comes out every week, so you can know to expect it there. If you aren't already, if you're just listening to this somewhere other than your iPhone or in the iTunes feed on your podcast or anywhere like that, subscribe to the show on iTunes. You can do that. Just search or type in oil or oil and gas, and the Oil and Gas Young Professionals pod feed will be up there in the top 5. Hopefully, if we get some more reviews, it'll be even closer to Mark's show, as number 1, or up there neck and neck with that show. So again, reviews are the major key to helping the show out. That's the number 1 thing you can do to help other people find it. So we got one more review. That puts us at 4. This one is from Brian Mon. Brian's a friend of the show, and he's reached out to me on Twitter. And he's just an all-around great guy to know. So this one's called Rising Stars, Interviewing Rising Stars. I can't believe this was the inaugural #OGYP pod. Pretty much flawless. He's a natural. James Gordy is a rising star, and I'm excited to see his influence uniting the next generation of the young oil and gas professionals. Listen to this podcast. Listen for him around the industry. ... Oil and gas. This Week Podcast, Surgecast, and follow him on Twitter. Keep up the great work, content, and interviews, James. All right, Brian, thank you so much for that. All right, so that puts us at 4 interviews right there. And I'm going to ask if you would go to jamesgordy.com/review and leave me one. That's a personal favor I'm asking of you. And if you do that, if we just get one more, that'll bump us up to 5, which means when you search the show, it'll show the average iTunes rankings, and it'll make this pod look a lot more legit. So if you could, just leave us a review. And also, there are some people listening out there. I know. I see the numbers. Reach out to me. Hit me up. Some people have done so, but I really like to hear from everyone to get your feedback or just to get to know about it, just to know you. So the easiest way to do that informally would be on Twitter, and that's at James_Gordy. And all my other contact information, LinkedIn, Facebook, everything like that, email, you can find on the show notes for the show. And that's going to be jamesgordy.com/OGYP03. That's OGYP03. Appreciate the time, and I'll speak to y'all next week.